In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul transitions, and now he's going to start talking about giving. He says to the church in Corinth, "Now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They're being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor." Pay attention to that. "But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity." So he says in verse 3, "For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more, and they did it of their own free will." And so what was happening is the church in Jerusalem was going through a famine, and so Paul was taking a collection at so many of the other churches along his route as he was on his missionary journey, and he was inviting them to give to the brothers and sisters in Jerusalem who were in need. And what he's saying is, even though the Macedonian Christians were poor, they were extremely generous. And he's explaining to the Corinthians that these guys are a great model for them. And so here's what he says to the Corinthians: "Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving." In other words, they were getting more mature in some of these other areas. They were very blessed as a church in some of these other areas. And so he's encouraging them. He's saying, "Great job, guys." But they were apparently really weak at giving. They weren't generous with their money. It was like their Christian faith hadn't reached down to their pocketbooks yet. And so he's saying, "Guys, I want you to get better at that." I think a lot of Christians today in the church need to heed these words. And here's why. He says, "You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich." In other words, don't forget, Jesus was generous to you. He freely forgave. You didn't earn it, and yet he forgave. And he says, in the same way, if you're a follower of Jesus, you should be generous in every way, to include being generous with your money. Now, I'll let you read some more of what he says there. But then I just want to show you this one other section here in verse 20. Paul says this: "We're traveling together to guard against any criticism for the way we are handling this generous gift. We're careful to be honorable before the Lord, but we also want everyone else to see that we are honorable." In other words, Paul was showing the way that we should handle giving in the church. He said we're being accountable so that someone doesn't swindle, so that someone doesn't steal the offering. And so there's some accountability. They were traveling in a group so that they could be held accountable to the church, and so that they could make sure that the gift that they had collected, all of the great giving that they had collected, could really get down to the people in Jerusalem who needed it. Anyway, that is what this chapter is all about. So you're ready to read chapter 8, and we'll see you tomorrow for chapter 9.